Well, I want to tell us a little story this morning as we jump into the text. The other night, Lonnie had recovered from her surgery, or is still recovering from her surgery, and this was probably either the first or second night she was home. And I wake up in the middle of the night, and I have a 90-pound German Shepherd. I also have a 26-pound German Shepherd. He's a puppy. That's his son. But anyway, the big one, Parker, was barking. Bark, 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 bark. Normally, in the middle of the night, if something happens, Matthew gets up and goes to the bathroom. Maybe the dog will bark, and then, it's Matthew, settle down. And we don't think anything of it, fall back asleep. Well, this was going on, and I'm like, well, I better get up. Something's going on. So, get my stuff, and I go out and, throw some shoes on and go, and I look, and I don't see anything, but he is like intent. There is something out that window, right? Out our front bay window there. And we usually keep the windows open, like the screens are closed, but the windows are open for the air. Don't have air conditioning except in the bedrooms. And he is like, and I'm like, okay, something is out there. Could be a cat, skunk, dog, don't know. Well, and then I hear like somebody talking to themselves, like a man's voice, like grunting. This guy is freaking out. Something's going on. And I'm like, what is going on? And so I look and I don't see anything. I go out to our front door and I look down and there's a Gatorade bottle on my front steps. I'm like, curious. And then I hear the man shouting, and I can't see him, but I hear, no, please, no, go away, please, no, don't bite me, no, And I'm like, what, my dog's here? So I look, and I kind of see something down the road, so I decide to go outside. I take a little bat I had been whittling, just something, I left the dog inside because I didn't want anybody to get hurt. So I go out and I look and I hear this guy and he is all out meltdown, right? And he's like, just leave me alone. I just want a drink of water. Please, don't bite me. No, please don't bite me. And he's screaming. And I'm like, what is going on? And I look down the road, actually, so I'm that way and this way, and I look down, and I walk out into our driveway, and I look down the street, and this guy, there's a figure, he has no shirt on, right, just shorts, and he's just running back and forth across the street. This is true story, this happened, this is not a joke or a setup. And he's just flying back and forth, super skinny man, just shorts on, and he's just, running around. And I'm like, what is going on? And so I walk out into the middle, kind of towards the road, and I look, and all of a sudden, and it's a full moon that night. This is a few nights ago, right? The moon is very big, very bright, and we got street lights. And the guy, from down the street, this deserted, he turns and he looks at me. And then he starts running towards me. And I'm like, time to go. So I go back inside, and he's like, don't bite me. And I'm like, I'm not gonna. And I go back in the house, lock. And so then I call 911. I say, there's somebody outside. He's not in his right mind. There's something going on. Maybe you could send somebody. And she says, okay, we'll put out a notification that there's somebody in the area. I described where it was and what was going on. And I could still hear him arguing with himself. And so then a little bit later, first of all, I made sure every door and window was locked, while I was waiting. And then I see the police show up, and they're kind of scanning with their big lights. And then, sure enough, they found him. He's sitting on the side of the road. And then a little bit later, an ambulance shows up, and they lock him, strap him down in the stretcher, and and they cart him away to get treatment. Now, what caused that? What was going on? Most likely he had taken some kind of drug, right? Some kind of substance, I don't know what. Could have been meth, could have been Something. Probably not alcohol. It didn't act like that. And what is going to be the prescribed treatment for this guy? Well, there's certain drugs. Hey, do we have any doctors or EMTs in the house? Yeah, Gavin's an EMT. Dr. Beaudry's a doctor. What would you do for a guy? Certain meds? What? I didn't hear you. Send him to a pastor. Obviously, he took something. And so you put some kind of, they have certain drugs that counteract it. And then they take him to the hospital, and then he has to go to the jail, probably, where he'll do some detox until he kind of cleanses out of it. You know. So I may see him. I don't know. I may see him in there someday. I'm not sure. But that's the situation. Scary. It was probably drug-induced. Could have been just a mental illness. That's less likely in our society. Even less likely than that, he could have been possessed by a demon. Very unlikely. Most likely drugs. Next likely mental illness. Least likely demon possession. Okay? That's our society. Now we have to go back 2,000 years, and we're going to talk about Jesus' society and what was happening with a similar situation. So go to Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 through 21. And we're going to call this a disturbing lack of faith. Some of you Star Wars fans might get that reference. A disturbing lack of faith. So go to Matthew chapter 17, verses 14 through 21. Jesus has just gone up to the Mount of Transfiguration, which means he has taken his top 3 disciples with him, and they've gone up to a mountain, and he has revealed himself as in his true form. He is actually the Son of God, God himself. And the disciples get to see this, 3 of them, and they're like, right? And it's amazing. And then he comes back down the mountain, and he tells them, don't tell anyone about this until later. So now they're at the foot of the mountain, and there's a commotion. Something is happening. You're about to see what is going on. When they came to the crowd, verse 14 of Matthew 17, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and very ill, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and said, you unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. Whoa, that's not the answer we expected to hear. Interesting. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. And nothing will be impossible for you. And now there's another verse here in verse 21, but it is probably not in the original. This is trying to harmonize Mark, and somehow this got stuck in there. This is actually in Mark's gospel. And it says, but this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. So Mark will deal with that part of this, okay? So just realize that some scribe accidentally put that in. And you say, well, doesn't that show how unreliable the Bible is? No. If anything, it shows how reliable it is that we can figure that out, right? We know how closely, and we know where those errors come from, which are very few and far between. We know exactly how it got in there. Somebody was copying from Mark's gospel, and had it in their head and just kind of got absent-minded. And this is exactly how we know it got there. So we're not going to deal with verse 21 today. When you get to Mark, we will do it there. So anyway, so this passage, right? There's a disturbance. There's some stuff going on. A man comes forward. There's a crowd gathered at the foot of the mountain with the 9 other disciples, right? You've got 3 that are up on the mountain with Jesus, 9 that are down there, total of 12. And of these 9, nobody could cast out this demon from this boy. His father brought him. And scary. And what's the situation with the boy? Well, actually, what I have done, this passage is also described in Mark's gospel and in Luke's gospel. And it is described much more clearly and it has many more verses in Mark's gospel than it does here in Matthew's gospel. So you realize the 4 gospels are 4 separate accounts of the life of Jesus, right? So this gospel is going to be slightly different than the others. So what I did, and I love doing this, by the way, if you're ever studying the Bible, especially the Gospels, and you go, I wish I knew more about what happened here. Well, here's a clue. Look at the other Gospels, right? See if there's any other passage that is the same thing but told in a different way. So what I did, I love doing this, I took the 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, about this story, and I combined them into one account. Okay, it's tricky, it's difficult. I did it. It's kind of hard to get it to flow smoothly, but see what you think. This will give us a much more full understanding of what it was that happened. On the next day, when they came down from the mountain and back to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. See, there's scribes here. Now you notice that. Immediately, when the entire crowd saw him, they were amazed and began running up to greet him. And he asked them, what are you discussing with them? And one of the crowd, a man, came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him, answering him, he shouted, saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and is very ill, and he often falls into the fire and often into the water. I brought you my son, possessed with a spirit, which makes him mute. See, there's more conditions here. And whenever it seizes him, it slams him to the ground, and it throws him into a convulsion with foaming at the mouth, and he grinds his teeth, and he stiffens out. And only with difficulty does it leave him, mauling him as it leaves. I brought him to your disciples, begging them to cast it out, and they could not do it, nor could they cure him. I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only boy. And Jesus answered them and said, Oh, you unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring your son here to me. And they brought the boy to him. While he was still approaching, when he saw him, immediately the demon slammed him to the ground, and the spirit threw him into a convulsion. Falling to the ground, he began rolling around and foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, How long has this been happening to him? And he said, From childhood. It has often thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, If you can? All things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the boy's father cried out and says, I do believe. Help my unbelief. When Jesus saw that a crowd was rapidly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, and saying to it, You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and do not enter him again. After crying out and throwing him into a terrible, terrible convulsions, the demon came out of him, and the boy became so much like a corpse that most of them said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and raised him, and he got up. And Jesus healed the boy, curing him at once, and gave him back to his father, and they were all amazed at the greatness of God. When he came into his house, or into the house, his disciples came to Jesus privately and began questioning him and said, Why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, Because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. This kind cannot come out by anything but prayer. All right, so that's the composite of all 3 Gospels on this passage. Very interesting, isn't it? You get more of a flavor of what was in there, what was going on, what was happening behind the scenes, and that's a great way to really understand the text and what we're dealing with. So I see here in this passage at least three groups of people with a lack of faith, right? A lack of faith. And that's really the main focus of this passage, a lack of faith. They didn't believe in God. They didn't believe in the power of God and what he could do. So the first person with a lack of faith is the father. And that's where you see in Mark chapter 9, verses 23 and 24, where he says to him, actually in verse 22, it has often thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us. And I love what Jesus says to him in verse 23 of Mark chapter 9. Jesus said to him, if you can, right? Have you ever prayed that way to Jesus? You're talking and you're saying, Lord, I need help. Lord, right? I need help. My wife is sick, like in my case. If you can heal her, would you please do it? And I can hear Jesus say this, right? If I can, if you can. Don't you love that clarification, that little question? Excuse me? Do we ever say that to God? Hey, God, I know you're busy, but if you can, if you can. That's just such a great, I love how Jesus calls him on it. Right? I just see his eyebrow, right? One eyebrow of Jesus, just, if you can, okay. And then the father, what does he say? Immediately the boy's father cried out, right? Saying and said, I do believe, help my unbelief. Please, 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 please. I believe. I believe, I believe, I believe. Right? Sounds like a good song. We should make a lyric out of that. I do believe, help my unbelief. So the father had a lack of faith, and that was part of the problem that was going on. Another group that had a lack of faith were the disciples. And that we see in verse 20. The disciples come, right? Actually, we see it all through here. In verse 16, I brought him to your disciples. This is back in Matthew 17. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. And then Jesus all of a sudden just says, oh, what's wrong with you? And then Jesus rebuked him. The demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, because of the littleness of your faith. Because your faith is tiny. That's why you couldn't do it. Another lack of faith here. And another part of the problem, part of the big scene. What's going on? The problem, the difficulty here. Jesus says, if you had faith, if you had even a mustard seed's worth of faith in God and his ability, you could move a mountain. You say, well, mountain, isn't that mean like literally? How come there aren't any mountains being moved right now? It's figurative, right? He's saying the demon won't, how come we can't drive a demon out of a boy? Jesus says, drive a demon out of a boy. Try moving a mountain. Try driving a mountain out of its place. If you have even that much, that's what you'll be able to do, let alone a demon out of a boy. The disciples had a disturbing lack of faith. And then the last group that had a lack of faith was the entire generation of people back then. And that's when he comes down, right? And at first you hear, if you don't know all three Gospels, if you just hear this, you hear a man comes to his father, or comes to Jesus, and the disciples can't cast this thing out, this demon out. And he says, please help me. And then it just sounds like Jesus goes, what's wrong with you all? And you're like, oh, why was he upset? Why? It sounds like he's upset, with something that's pretty innocuous. Pretty like, not that big a deal. But then you realize the disciples had the lack of faith. The Father himself had a lack of faith. And also, there were a group of scribes there, by the way, that were debating and arguing, and the crowd itself. And he says, all of you are awful. Why? Because of this mess, this whole situation. Parents, teachers. I was talking about an experience I had substitute teaching a long time ago. Taught a kindergarten class. And normally in a kindergarten class, you'll have maybe two or three troublemakers that really need some extra care and attention. This class, I had 2 or 3 good kids that could kind of watch out for themselves. And it was utter chaos. I'm not kidding. One kid screaming in my face, and another, and you call, and then in the time you go get the phone to call the office to come and get him, another 2 kids have taken paper towel and turned the sink on full blast and have wetted the towel and are flinging it all over the room. You're like, no, stop. And then another kid has gotten the paint and the paint is everywhere. And you're like, and I came into that situation and I'm like, stop. What's wrong with you? And I think of that's why it was fresh in my mind, this remembrance. I think of Jesus coming back down from the mountain. He's just transfigured so that his disciples know, the 3 see his glory. And he comes back down from the mountain and he sees this. It's almost like Moses, right? Coming down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments, 2 stone tablets, right? And then he sees, So Jesus comes down from the mountain with his disciples like, this is awesome. The disciples are happy. And then he looks and there's paint all over the place, right? There's paper towel. Obviously not literally. But what is going on? What's this? There's arguments with scribes. There's disciples who can't cast out a simple demon. They have been given authority to be able to do this. They should have been able to do this. Jesus allowed them. He gave them that power. And the entire generation, you unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here. They should have been able to handle this. They should have had victory over Satan and his kingdom, and they didn't. And then they said, why? Notice they didn't ask, how could you cast him out? They don't need to know that. They know Jesus can cast out any demon at will, no problem, perfectly, easily. Instead, they ask, how come we couldn't do it? They know Jesus could do it. Everybody knows that. But how come we can't? Because you lack faith. The littleness of your faith. Now, honestly, that's us, isn't it? Our society. We have such a lack of faith today in the power of God. It's becoming a problem, isn't it? I see this. This exists. This lack of faith exists on the part of struggling parents in our society. They don't believe that there's anything that can help their children. We've had COVID that has messed us up, and now our kids are so messed up, there's nothing we can do. Not even God can help us. We have such little faith. It's the parent that just wrings their hands and goes, how do I handle my child? I don't know what to do. And have they prayed at all to God about it? The lack of faith. It exists on the part of the disciples of Jesus, otherwise known as the church. We are discouraged and defeated. COVID kicked almost all of the local churches in the teeth in the last 3 years. We got a great big boot to the face. And now the churches are reeling and going, what do? We lost everybody that I know of has lost 40% of the attendance of the church. That's huge, and that's difficult to deal with. I don't know if that's God purging his church, purifying it. I don't know. But COVID really hurt us, kicked us in the teeth. And we have a lack of faith, and now we are discouraged, and we think, well, nothing we can do. This lack of faith exists on the part of the entire unbelieving and perverted generation in which we live. In Luke 18, right? Let's go there. Luke 18, 1 through 8. Our society has forgotten how to pray. We have forgotten how to talk to God, and that we should talk to God. Our church has forgotten how to pray. We'll do it individually. We don't come to God together. Luke 18, 1 through 8, it says, "Now he was telling them a parable to show them that at all times they ought to pray and not to lose heart. Saying, in a certain city there was a judge who did not fear God and did not respect man. Verse 3, there was a widow in that city, and she kept coming to him, saying, give me legal protection from my opponent. For a while he was unwilling. But afterward he said to himself, even though I do not fear God, nor respect man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will give her legal protection. Otherwise, by continually coming, she will wear me out. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge said. Now, will not God bring about justice for his elect who cry to him day and night? And will he delay long over them? I tell you that he will bring about justice for them quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Is that what God's going to find? Is that what Jesus is going to find when he comes back? Is he going to find faith on the earth at all? Compare this generation to that generation 2,000 years ago. He called them an unbelieving and perverted generation. Are we more believing and less perverted? I don't think so. Why can't we do the impossible? Because of the littleness of our faith. That's what it is, isn't it? So, application time. Do you have a child? Parents? Grandparents? Do you have a child or a grandparent that needs deliverance from their sins, from even demonic, not possession necessarily, but oppression? This child often would throw himself into the fire, throw himself into the water, try to kill himself. Do we have problems with kids nowadays that try to cut themselves? Try to hurt themselves? And they can't seem to get over it, and they can't seem to snap out of it, and we don't know what to do, and everything we've tried doesn't help, and the drugs haven't helped, and the medication hasn't helped, and the therapists haven't helped, and what do we do? Why can't we get rid of this? Why can't we help them? Why can't we cast this quote-unquote demon out of these kids? It doesn't even have to be a demon. It can just be the oppressiveness of sin in their lives. How do we do this? What do we do? Take them to Jesus. We need to take our kids to Jesus. We need to pray faithfully, fervently, all the time, without ceasing, day and night. Pray. If you want to accomplish a lot in your children's lives, you and I need to learn how to pray for them. We need to learn to pray for them. We need to get in the habit of praying for them and not give up the habit of praying for them. Faithfully pray for them and have faith. So that's the first application. If your child or grandchild has something that is troubling them and that they can't seem to get over, you go to the Lord in prayer and continue. Even if they don't have anything that seems to be troubling them, thank God every day and continue to pray that he would continue to protect and guide their steps. Second application I would have to say, do you yourself have a sin in your life that you can't get over? You can't quite seem to defeat. There's something, and you know it's wrong. You know it's wrong. You know what it is. That thing pop into your head just now, you know you do it every day, and you can't seem to get victory over it. I don't know what it is. You know what it is. What do we do about that? I think the first step in that situation is that we have to admit that there is a problem, right? If you're addicted to any kind of sin, it's going to kill you someday. Okay? I don't care what the addiction is. If it's drugs, if it's alcohol, if it's sex, if it's pornography, it will kill you someday. What are you talking about? Well, let's say, imagine that you were going to the doctor tomorrow and you get a test result back and he says the results are not good, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so or Miss or Mr., right? There's a tumor and it's aggressive and it's malignant, left untreated. If you don't do anything about this, you have less than 3 months to live. At the end of this time, the tumor is going to take over your body and it will shut you down and you will die. And you take a minute for that to sink in and you go, whoa. Then you go, wait a minute, left untreated. Is there something I can do? Is there anything we can do about this? What can I do? And the doctor says, well, there's one thing that might work. It's going to take several hours every day. It's going to take a lot of commitment and effort on your part. It's going to be painful. It's going to be difficult. But with this treatment, we believe that you can be cured and live a normal, healthy life. Do you want that cure? And you go, yes, I'll do what it takes. Come on, right? Who would not? I know there's some people that gets a little older towards the end of their life anyway. They would say, well, let's not. But let's say you're young and healthy and otherwise, maybe in your 20s or 30s. You would do whatever it takes, right? You would go to chemo. You would get the treatment. You would have the pain. And can you imagine some 20-year-old guy, some 25-year-old man, 30-year-old woman? And she says, no, that's too much work. I'm too busy. I don't have time for my cancer treatments. I've got too much to do. I don't want anyone to find out that I have cancer. So I'm just not going to treat it. Guess what? They're going to find out in about 3 months when you die. Right? So stay with me now. Sin is like a cancer. And before you can get better, you have to realize that it's a problem and it needs addressing. You have to realize how bad it is. If you have a sin that you're addicted to, you're just like the young man in that true story who had a demon, right? Everyone in his life was trying to manage his symptoms. His mom, his dad, they're trying to, oh no, he fell in the fire. They grab him, they pull him out. Oh no, he fell in the water. They rescue him from the water. The demon keeps throwing him in there. Eventually, what's going to happen to this young man? His mom and dad are going to get older. One day their backs are going to be turned. They're not going to see and notice. And the boy is going to get thrown in the fire, and he's going to die. And they're not going to get him out in time. Right? The boy's going to kick his mom, knock her out. She's going to be incapacitated, and the demon's going to run off and do something to the boy. Why would demons do this, by the way? Well, demons hate us, of course. They hate God and they hate us because God loves us. So they want to kill us and hurt us in any way they can. If you don't admit your sin and seek help, it will one day kill you. It will just get worse. The law of diminishing returns says that you're just going to be satisfied less and less with more and more, right? And eventually you're going to need more and more to feel happy. And eventually your sin is going to overtake you and you're going to get in trouble. You're going to lose everything. You're going to die. You're going to face judgment. But if you have Christ, even if you have Christ and you don't, you're not willing to admit this is a problem, it's going to lead to death. So the second step now, once you have admitted that this is a big problem, this sin that I have that I can't get rid of and I just don't know what to do, first step is to admit it, and the second step now is to believe that God can fix your sin problem. Believe that God can fix your sin problem. This is honestly the real reason why you or I, any of us, can't have victory over sin. Is because we don't believe that God can really fix us. We don't really believe that God can fix us. Why can't I drive this sin out of my life once and for all? Jesus says, because of the littleness of your faith. Believe that he can save you. Believe that he can give you self-control. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Jesus says, if you or I have faith the size of a mustard seed, that we can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Your disciples can't drive a demon out of a boy. Well, guess what? Even if you have a smidgen of faith, you can move a mountain from its place. Demon shmeeman, right? Demon shmeeman. Let's all say that together. Demon shmeeman. That's what faith is. Belief that God is stronger. Greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world, it says in the Bible.